So imagine it's 1945.
Okay.
You're in Barcelona. But I need you to completely wipe the image of that sun-drenched, tourist-friendly, vibrant city from your mind.
Right. Definitely not the postcard version.
Exactly. Picture a misty, heavy dawn. The streets are narrow and they're just weeping with this dampness from the sea. And you're standing in a heavily scarred alleyway.
It's super atmospheric.
It really is. And hidden right there in the heart of the city is this massive carved wooden door. And behind that door is a secret library.
The Cemetery of Forgotten Books.
Yes. And this place, it operates on this single terrifying rule. If it's your first time visiting, you have to choose one forgotten book. Just one. And you have to adopt it.
Which means protecting it, right?
Right. You have to keep it alive. You have to protect it from being completely erased from history.
It's such a brilliant hook.
It really is. And that's what we're getting into today. Welcome to a brand new deep dive. We are wading into the murky, beautiful, and honestly, deeply traumatic waters of Carlos Ruiz Zafón's international masterpiece, The Shadow of the Wind.
I am so ready for this.
Me too. And just to be clear with everyone, we're not just doing a plot summary today. That's our mission here. We are going to rip this narrative down to its studs.
Yeah, the sources we're pulling from today, they are a stack of intense literary critiques and narrative summaries. They treat this novel less like a basic thriller and more like a psychological case study.
Right, because it is heavy.
It really is. We are looking at an entire ecosystem of trauma here. The historical analyses we've reviewed, they dissect how this book operates as this exploration of post-Civil War Barcelona.
And the brutal physics of totalitarian fear, too.
Exactly, along with the actual mechanics of storytelling itself. We'll be looking at the structural triumphs of the book, but, and I think this is the fun part, we aren't going to shy away from the sharp criticisms we found in the sources.
Oh, yeah. The critics really go after how the author actually built this labyrinth.
They pull no punches.
So let's pull you, the listener, right back into that world. That gloomy 1945 Barcelona. One essayist we looked at had this incredible description.
I know the one you mean.
Yeah, they described the city in this era like a woman who has survived a brutal war, but just hasn't yet had the time or the safety, really, to wash the blood from her neck.
Wow. That is a visceral image.
Right. It sets the mood perfectly. The walls are pale. The city is reeling, and there is just this quiet, pervasive fear suffocating everybody.
And that atmosphere, it isn't just a cool Gothic backdrop. The sources emphasize that it functions as the psychological weather of the entire narrative.
The psychological weather, I like that.
Yeah, because you really cannot understand the bizarre, desperate actions of these characters without understanding that oppressive silence they are all drowning in.
Right, because it's a dictatorship.
Exactly. And in a dictatorship, secrets are kept as quietly and as strictly as the names of the dead.
That's haunting.
It is. The physical decay of the city mirrors the internal moral decay of a society that has essentially been forced to cannibalize itself.
Which brings us right to the core tension we are exploring today, this epic, multi-layered battle between memory and oblivion.
And the terrifyingly destructive nature of obsessive love.
Yes. Plus that ultimate question of, well, why humanity desperately uses stories to build a bridge over the void in the first place.
The sheer atmospheric tension of this setup is incredible. But beneath all that smoke and mirrors, there is a very rigid philosophical architecture.
Which we promise to unpack.
No.
So let's get into why a simple book hidden in a basement carries the weight of a human soul in this universe.
Let's do it. Let's start with that basement. The Cemetery of Forgotten Books.
The spark of the obsession. So the story opens with a 10-year-old boy named Daniel Sempere. It's early morning, and his father, who is this humble, grieving antiquarian bookseller, takes Daniel by the hand through these twisting ancient alleyways.
Right.
And they arrive at that hidden door we talked about. The visual scale of this place, according to the text, is staggering.
It's a massive spiraling labyrinth, right?
Yeah, just shelves of books that disappear up into the darkness. Millions of volumes that the world has forgotten or abandoned or actively tried to destroy.
And then the father gives him that rule.
Right. He tells 10-year-old Daniel that he must wander this endless maze and choose one single book. Just one. And adopt it.
So Daniel is wandering through this absolute ocean of decaying paper, and he's drawn to a specific book. It has a crimson cover.
He pulls it out, and the title is The Shadow of the Wind.
By a completely unknown author.
Yeah.
Julián Carax.
Right. And Daniel takes it home and just devours it. He reads the entire thing in a single feverish night.
Now, when we look at the analysis of this, We need to think of the cemetery not just as a cool fantasy library setting. The expert sources describe it as an ontological resistance.
Ontological resistance. Break that down for us.
So think of it like a tether in outer space. Without the tether, an astronaut just drifts into the dark, right? They disappear into nothingness.
Okay, yeah.
In Zafon's universe, the act of a reader opening a book is that tether. It literally pulls the author's existence back from the void.
So it's like an archive for souls that official history rejected.
Exactly. The books here are physical vessels. They hold the spirit of the author. But crucially, the analysis points out that they also hold a fragment of the spirit of every single person who has ever read them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, anyone who dreamed with them or suffered with them, they all live in the book.
It's a stunning concept, but, a few of the literary critics we reviewed actually push back pretty hard on this opening sequence.
They do. They ask a very blunt structural question.
Right. They ask, does the Cemetery of Forgotten Books actually matter to the plot?
Which is a valid question.
Yeah.
Because technically, Daniel could have found this rare book in a dusty box at a flea market.
Or just had it handed down by a dying relative.
Right. And the actual mechanics of the mystery would unfold the exact same way.
So the contrarian view from the sources is that it's a brilliant conceptual hook, mostly just to sell the fantasy of reading to book lovers, but structurally, it's almost decorative.
Yeah, several critics point out that the novel leans heavily into romanticizing the physical act of reading.
Like the whole smell of old paper trope.
Exactly. The dust motes dancing in the light, the magical aura of bookstores. The critics argue these are cliches that can actually alienate readers who are looking for deeper intellectual rigor.
They say it makes the text feel overly sentimental or even emotionally manipulative.
But I know you have some thoughts on that critique.
I do. I have to push back on that. Because here's how I see it, based on the psychological analysis we read. Think of the Cemetery of Forgotten Books, like an orphanage for souls.
An orphanage for souls, okay.
Right. Sure, you could technically adopt a child by finding a baby abandoned on a random doorstep in an alleyway.
And the end result, you raising a child, is the same.
Exactly. But the ritual of walking into an orphanage, looking at all those faces, and making a conscious, verbalized vow to protect this specific life that the rest of the world threw away.
I see where you're going.
That entirely changes the psychology of the protagonist. It's not just finding a lost item, it's a blood oath.
And we have to remember Daniel's state of mind here. He has recently lost his mother.
Yes. He is terrified that he is forgetting her face. The sources highlight that he is deeply traumatized by the concept of fading memory.
Which completely reframes that ceremony in the cemetery. When Daniel makes his choice in that sacred space, he isn't just acquiring an object, he is accepting a psychological burden.
Because he's projecting, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He is projecting his own desperate need to save his mother's memory onto this physical object. He couldn't stop his mother from fading into oblivion, but he realizes he can stop this book from fading.
So the ritual actually binds his fate to Julian's. The cemetery matters because it establishes the moral stakes of memory right from page 1. It weaponizes his grief.
That is a great way to put it. His grief fuels his obsession.
And he loves this book so much he goes out into the city trying to find other works by this Julián Carax. He just wants to devour everything the man ever wrote.
But instead of finding a nice back catalog at the local bookstore, he uncovers a terrifying reality.
Yeah, it gets really dark here. He finds out that someone or something has been systematically hunting down and burning every single copy of every single book Julián Carax has ever published.
A literal eradication campaign. And it's been going on for years.
And the terror of that is really amplified by the identity of the arsonist.
Right, because this guy burning the books, this mysterious, faceless, scarred figure who constantly smells the smoke and fire, he actually introduces himself to Daniel.
And he gives his name as Lean Kubert.
Which makes Daniel's blood run cold.
Because in the book Daniel just read, The Shadow of the Wind, Lean Kubert is the literal name of the devil.
It is such a crazy twist. It shifts the narrative genre instantly. We go from a historical coming-of-age mystery straight into gothic horror.
The psychological terror of being hunted by a fictional character is profound.
And the analytical text we are drawing from, they frame this figure, Lean Kubert, as a manifestation of what they call nihilism turned inward.
Nihilism turned inward, because normally book burning is an external thing, right?
Exactly. We usually think of censorship or book burning as an external systemic force, like a government trying to control a populace by burning subversive texts.
But this is an internal eradication.
Yes. This figure isn't just burning paper. He is attempting to retroactively erase an entire identity from the timeline. He wants it to be as if Julián Carax never existed at all. It is essentially an existential suicide.
Which introduces a massive moral dilemma for the reader. The literary essays we review bring up a really interesting real-world parallel here.
The Kafka situation.
Right, Franz Kafka. So before Kafka died, he famously instructed his close friend Max Brod to burn all of his unpublished manuscripts. He wanted his life's work destroyed.
But Brod ignored him.
He ignored him, he published the works, and Kafka became a titan of literature.
But applying that to Daniel's situation in the novel raises a really terrifying question for us.
It really does. Because if a creator decides that their creation is a mistake, or that it brings them too much agony to exist, do we as the audience have the absolute right to play savior?
Right. By keeping this book alive, is Daniel actually violating the author's ultimate wish?
It's a huge question. It forces us to ask who actually owns the legacy of a piece of art once it enters the world.
Does it belong to the artist's personal pain? Or does it belong to humanity's collective memory?
Because Léon Kubert is not a literary critic trying to suppress bad art. He represents the author's ultimate pure self-loathing.
So by protecting the book, Daniel is actively fighting the author's own despair. Daniel completely believes he is acting as this heroic guardian of Julian's legacy.
But he might actually be prolonging the man's purgatory.
Exactly. It completely shatters that romantic notion we just established at the cemetery.
The idea that saving a book is an inherently, unarguably righteous act.
It makes everything so much more complicated. And as Daniel digs deeper into the ghost of Julián Carax, the actual architecture of the story reveals itself to be a trap.
A trap for Daniel. Because Daniel's coming of age begins to terrifyingly mirror Julián Carax's past.
The sources use a great analogy here. They say Daniel and Julian's lives are like a tuning fork.
A tuning fork, right. Striking Julian's past in the 1910s and 20s causes Daniel's present in the 1940s and 50s to vibrate at the exact same tragic frequency.
It's fatal echoes. So let's look at the loves in Daniel's life to see how this plays out.
Okay, first, he develops this intense infatuation with Clara Barcelona.
Right. She is older, she is blind, and she is beautiful.
But the psychological breakdowns of the text are quick to point out that this is an illusion of love.
It's a total illusion. The analysis shows that Daniel actually uses Clara's blindness as a defensive shield.
Because she cannot physically see him.
Exactly. She cannot see his youth, his awkwardness, his deep insecurities. He reads to her, and he acts out this role of the savior, bringing light into her dark world.
But in reality, he is using her as a perfectly safe, blank receptacle for his own romantic fantasies.
It's a love built entirely on narcissism and projection.
Which violently shatters when he discovers her in a compromising position with her music teacher. The illusion just completely breaks.
But then, the tuning fork strikes again, and Daniel finds real love.
He falls for Beatriz Aguilar.
And this is where the real danger starts. Because Beatriz is the sister of Daniel's best friend, Tomas.
And Tomas is not someone you want to mess with. He is a physically imposing, fiercely protective brother.
Right, and he has explicitly warned Daniel with the threat of severe physical violence to stay away from her.
So by pursuing Beatriz, Daniel is crossing a massive boundary of loyalty and friendship.
And this is exactly where the vibration between Daniel and Julian perfectly aligns. Because decades earlier, Julian also experienced a tragic, deeply forbidden love.
Julian, who comes from a poor working-class background, fell madly in love with Penelope Aldaya, and she is the daughter of an incredibly wealthy, powerful Barcelona family.
The class divide there was an absolute chasm.
But they were young and they were desperate, so they formed a plan to elope to Paris to escape the suffocating social expectations of their world.
And Julian is helped by his wealthy friend, Michael Moliner, who bankrolls the escape.
But here's the horrific part. The Aldaya family discovers the affair right before they can run away.
And the Aldaya family's reaction isn't just anger. The sources describe it as archaic, medieval brutality.
It is so hard to read. They lock Penelope in her room. They literally brick her into the mansion.
Because she is pregnant with Julian's child.
So she is kept there, completely isolated in the dark, abandoned by everyone. And she eventually dies in childbirth, along with the infant.
Meanwhile, Julian is waiting at the train station. He waits for hours.
Because he doesn't know what happened.
Right. So he assumes the most cynical outcome. He assumes that she changed her mind, that her wealth won out over his poverty, and that she abandoned him.
He is brokenhearted and completely ignorant of her horrific fate. So he flees to Paris alone.
And he spends years living a life of absolute misery, playing piano in a brothel, surrounded by bodies, but completely isolated.
Writing books to process his grief for a woman he thinks betrayed him.
Now, looking at this through the lens of psychological theory, which our sources do heavily, we are dealing with a massive scale of repetition compulsion.
Repetition compulsion.
Yeah, it's the Freudian concept where an individual unconsciously repeats a traumatic event or its circumstances over and over.
But the author, Zafón, elevates this from individual psychology to an entire generational curse.
Exactly. In this book, history doesn't just happen. It repeats its traumas until someone actually understands the mechanics of the trauma and actively breaks the cycle.
So Julian is the terrifying shadow of what Daniel could become.
Yes. If Daniel lets his obsession with Beatriz and his fear of her brother Tomás consume him the way Julian let his fear consume him, Daniel will end up exactly like Julian.
A hollowed-out ghost haunting his own life.
And the tragedy of Julian and Penelope, it isn't just about class.
No, the critiques highlight a much, much darker layer.
There were devastating social and biological taboos at play.
Yeah, this is the part that really hits you, because it's eventually revealed that Penelope was actually Julian's half-sister.
They share the exact same father, though neither of them knew it.
But the patriarch of the Aldia family knew, which is why his reaction to the pregnancy was so violently absolute.
Right. It shifts the narrative from a standard tragic romance straight into the realm of Greek tragedy.
It really does. It frames love not as a fairy tale, but as a biological and social trap.
The system was rigged against them from before they were even born. They were acting on this profound magnetic connection, completely unaware that their biology had marked their love as a fatal transgression.
The tragedy is rooted in absolute deterministic doom.
Which really makes you look at your own life, you know?
Oh, absolutely. It makes you wonder, have you ever found yourself repeating the exact mistakes of the generation before you?
Have you ever looked up and realized you are walking the exact same path your parents or mentors walked, completely blind to the trap until the jaws have already snapped shut?
Because that's what's happening to Daniel. He is walking blindly into the exact same jaws.
And to survive a trap you can't see, you need a guide who knows the terrain of the dark.
Which is the perfect transition. This brings us to the two ultimate supporting characters in the novel.
Fermín Romero de Torres and Inspector Francisco Javier Fumero.
They represent the two opposing philosophical responses to this brutal world.
Let's start with Fermín.
He is honestly one of the most compelling characters in the book. He is introduced as a homeless man, living on the streets, literally starving to death.
And Daniel and his father rescue him. They give him a job at the bookshop, and he becomes a mentor to Daniel.
But Fermín is not your typical wise, serene, older sage. He has a horrific past.
He was brutally tortured by the police, specifically by Inspector Fumero, during the political unrest.
Yet, despite having his body broken and seeing the absolute worst of human depravity, Fermín retains this razor-sharp, satirical, incredibly resilient humor.
He is the moral compass of the story. And the essays we read actually compare his archetype to Zorba the Greek.
I love that comparison.
It gets right to the heart of his function in the story. Zorba is an archetype of a man who embraces life fully, with all its tragedies, choosing joy and action over passive despair.
So Fermín uses humor not merely as a coping mechanism, but as an active weapon.
Exactly. Every time he makes a joke, every time he appreciates a beautiful woman or a good meal, he is actively rebelling against the trauma that was inflicted upon him.
He refuses to let the cruelty of the state dictate his internal reality. Humor is his ontological resistance.
That's spot on. And then we have the absolute embodiment of that state cruelty.
Inspector Fumero. Now, before we break down Fumero, I need to be very clear with everyone listening.
Right, the impartiality note.
Yes. The sources we are using dive heavily into the Spanish Civil War, Franco's regime, and the systemic corruption of the era. But we are exploring how the author uses the specific historical trauma to personify evil within the narrative.
We are not taking a political stance or endorsing any sides regarding the actual history itself. We are just looking at the literary analysis.
Exactly. So back to Fumero.
For Zafón, the post-war totalitarian setting is basically a laboratory to explore human nature under extreme duress.
So if L'Incubator represents internal nihilism,
Fumero represents systemic nihilism. He is violence that has gained institutional legitimacy.
he operates with the badge and authority of the state, but his cruelty is deeply, terrifyingly personal.
He doesn't view people as citizens or even as enemies. He views them as raw material to be crushed, simply to prove his own dominance and his own existence.
The state needs a butcher to maintain fear, and Fumero needs a slaughterhouse to satisfy his sadism.
It's a completely symbiotic relationship of evil.
But here is where a really sharp literary critique pushes back on the author's choice.
The critique about Fumero being too evil.
Yes. The critics ask, is Fumero almost too evil for his own good?
Right, because if you have a villain who is essentially a psychopathic monster from childhood, I mean, the book mentions he tortured animals as a kid before growing up to torture people. Does that actually weaken the philosophical depth of the story?
If Fumero is just pure, unadulterated evil, do we miss out on a more nuanced critique of how ordinary, regular people become complicit in corrupt systems?
That is a critical flaw pointed out in several analyses. By making Fumero a cartoonish sadist, the narrative arguably lets the reader off the hook.
Because we look at Fumero and think, well, I'm not a monster who tortures animals, so I am not part of the problem.
Exactly. It completely ignores Hannah Arendt's concept of the banality of evil.
The banality of evil. Remind us what that is.
It's the chilling reality that horrific atrocities are usually committed by terrifyingly normal bureaucrats who are simply following orders and advancing their careers.
Right. So a villain who is just born evil is a great thriller antagonist.
But it sacrifices a deeper sociological critique of 1940s Spain. Fumero functions more like a mythic dragon for the hero to slay than a complex psychological portrait of a corrupted man.
And Daniel eventually has to face that dragon.
Which brings us to the climax of the novel.
Yes. The tension finally breaks when Daniel receives this massive 80-page manuscript. It's written by Nuria Montfort, a secondary character who worked in publishing just before she was murdered.
And this document is a giant confession. It reveals the final mechanics of the mystery.
It acts as the cipher to the entire labyrinth. It tells Daniel that Julián Carax did not die in a duel, which was the prevailing rumor.
What actually happened was that Julián eventually returned from Paris to Barcelona. He broke into the decaying Aldaya mansion, and he discovered the truth.
He found the locked room, he discovered the crib, he realized Penelope died alone, giving birth to their child.
And he realized the incest taboo that he had unknowingly broken.
This realization completely shatters his mind. In an absolute frenzy of agony, he sets fire to the mansion, nearly burning to death himself.
He survives, but his face is melted. He becomes the scarred man. He adopts the name L'Incubator, the devil from his own book.
And the psychological motivation for the book burning finally clicks into place here.
Right, because every single book he ever wrote in Paris was a monument to his love for Penelope.
But once he learns the agonizing truth that his love is what condemned her to a horrific death, those books are no longer monuments.
They are tombstones.
They are constant, unbearable reminders of his failure and the tragedy that destroyed her.
He isn't acting out of censorship. He's trying to burn his own memory alive.
Which sets the board for the grand showdown. It happens at the rotting, spooky Aldaya mansion.
Daniel and Beatrice have gone there to hide because their relationship has been discovered. And Beatrice is pregnant.
Tomas is furious, but the real threat is Inspector Fumero. He arrives at the mansion to execute Daniel and Beatrice to settle his old grudges and tie up loose ends.
And just as Fumero is about to kill them, Julián Carax L'Incubator emerges from the shadows of the rotting house.
The ghost steps into reality to save Daniel, to physically stop the tuning fork from vibrating.
A violent struggle ensues. Julián kills Fumero. Daniel is shot in the chest, but he survives.
It is an incredibly cinematic, breathless conclusion.
But, and we have to talk about this, the literary critiques we were studying have some severe structural issues with how this climax is executed.
Yeah, let's look at the info dump critique regarding Nuria's letter.
The critic asks, is an 80-page letter from a secondary character just a lazy narrative device?
Because the author built up all this incredible atmospheric mystery, and instead of Daniel uncovering the truth organically, through action and deduction.
He literally just sits down in a chair and reads a document that explains the entire plot.
From a pure screenwriting or structural perspective, it violently breaks the golden rule of show, don't tell.
It completely halts the present-day momentum of the thriller to deliver pure exposition.
Now, a defender of the book might argue that in a novel entirely dedicated to the power of the written word, having the ultimate truth delivered via a manuscript is thematically consistent.
That's a fair point. But structurally, the critics argue it feels like the author painted himself into a wildly complex corner and just needed a quick, brute force way out.
And the criticism doesn't stop at the letter. It extends to the epilogue, too.
Oh, the ending, yeah.
After all this trauma, the blood, the oppressive regime, the ghost of Julián, Daniel survives the gunshot. He marries Beatrice. They have a son, and they name him Julian.
And the book jumps forward a decade to 1955. Daniel takes his son to the Cemetery of Forgotten Books, repeating the exact ritual his father did with him.
So one essayist argues that this rosy, incredibly happy ending feels totally disjointed from the bleak, oppressive reality of the rest of the book.
They claim it undermines the dark reality of living under a totalitarian regime by wrapping trauma up with a wedding and a baby.
They say it feels like a fairy tale grafted onto a tragedy.
The crux of that argument is that trauma of that magnitude, both the personal trauma of the characters and the national trauma of Spain, it does not resolve neatly.
So by ending on such a triumphant, cyclical note, the critic feels it minimizes the actual lingering suffering of the era. But wait, I have to debate this.
Go for it.
If we take that critic's logic, wouldn't a tragic ending utterly destroy the philosophical thesis of the book?
How so?
Well, the whole point of the narrative is about breaking a fatalistic cycle. Julian and Penelope were destroyed by their society, their secrets, and their inability to escape the trap. If Daniel and Beatrice also die in that mansion, if Fumero wins and kills them, what is the point of the story? Doesn't a tragic ending just prove that Lane Kubert was right?
That nihilism always wins and the cycle of trauma is unbreakable?
Exactly. I would argue that the happy ending isn't a fairy tale at all. It's the ultimate philosophical victory. Daniel survives because he chose to integrate and understand the past, whereas Julian was ignorant of it.
That makes a lot of sense.
Isn't that survival the exact proof that humanity can overcome its darkest impulses?
That is a really vital counterargument. Because if the novel is a structural battle between memory and oblivion, then Daniel's death would be a massive victory for Oblivion.
Yes. The survival of Daniel and his new family represents the endurance of the human spirit.
It validates Firmin's philosophy too, choosing life and humor over despair.
And the generational cycle is broken not by forgetting the past, but by integrating it.
Naming the child Julian is an act of honoring the trauma without being consumed by it. He takes the ghost and turns it into a living future.
He integrated the past rather than erasing it.
But, how does a story like this survive across actual geographic and cultural borders?
That's a great question, because the memory isn't just kept alive by Daniel within the fiction. It's kept alive by the language itself in the real world.
Which brings us to the monumental task of translating Zafón's work. This is actually a massive focus in several of the analyses we read.
It is a critical piece of the puzzle. The essays emphasize that in the shadow of the wind, language itself functions as a character.
The vivid descriptions of a decaying Barcelona, the mist, the gargoyles, the cobblestones, they aren't just a backdrop. They are the emotional architecture.
So translating that is not just a matter of swapping out vocabulary words like a dictionary.
No, it is an act of literary recreation.
The sources specifically highlight the Arabic translator Murawa Abdulmajid. They praise him for perfectly capturing Zafón's poetic, almost painterly use of language.
Because to maintain that depth, the melancholy, and the specific cadence of the original Spanish, it requires a translator who is not just bilingual, but is a deeply sensitive artist.
Abdulmajid is lauded for ensuring the Arabic text carries the exact same psychological weight and mystery as the original.
The translator is engaging in the exact same ritual as Daniel. They are adopting a story and protecting it from being lost in the void of a language barrier.
It really makes you think about how the mechanics of translation are just this massive leap of faith.
It really is.
When you read a book translated from another language, you are essentially trusting a stranger with the soul of the story.
You are trusting that they felt the exact same heartbreak, the exact same terror, the exact same joy that the original author intended.
And that they possess the skill to rebuild that exact feeling inside your brain.
It is a profound act of empathy. Both the translator empathizing with the author and the reader empathizing with the text.
It proves that the Cemetery of Forgotten Books isn't just a physical place in Barcelona. It's the collective effort of translators, readers, and writers keeping human memory alive across the globe.
Which brings all these massive threads perfectly together.
It does. We started in a misty dawn, in a city of secrets.
We explored how a hidden library acts as an ontological rebellion against the forces of forgetting.
We watched Daniel walk a tightrope, dangerously close to repeating the tragic, deterministic history of Julián Carax.
Proving that trauma loops endlessly until someone understands it well enough to stop it.
We analyzed the profound battle between destructive nihilism, whether it's systemic violence like Fumero or internal self-erasure like Lane Kubert.
And the protective, active choices of love and humor represented by Fermin.
And we tore down the structural execution of the novel itself, debating the mechanics of its 80-page confessions and the philosophical weight of its hopeful ending.
It has been an incredibly dense journey through the mechanics of a masterpiece.
It really has. But to wrap this up, I want to leave you, the listener, with a lingering, profound question to mull over. Something that builds on the Kafka dilemma we discussed earlier.
I like this.
We spend our whole lives trying to be remembered. We leave traces of ourselves in our work, in our art, in the people we love.
Right?
But what if your greatest tragedy was immortalized in a story you couldn't control?
That's terrifying.
If you were Julián Carax, and the only proof you existed was a book that caused you nothing but absolute agony, would you leave it on the shelf for a 10-year-old boy to find?
Or would you strike the match yourself?
Thank you so much for joining us on this extensive deep dive. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and whatever you do, keep reading.